I mean, if someone was to kind of wonder, like, how does a psychedelic, pharmaceutical startup make money? Would the answer be along the lines of, you just mentioned, a kind of temporary monopoly on how you provide it through clinics, or perhaps it's through the manufacture of a particular kind of pill, particular way of synthesizing it? Are those the kinds of ways that a company would make money in the space?
Yeah, so I think there's a variety of different ways. I mean, the way that would be most important, I guess, thinking about it from a patent perspective, would generally be for these, a patent that covers a particular compound. So that's, it's most similar to this pharmaceutical space. Um, so, and I think that's also what people are looking at, from the investment perspective, because that's where people are really going to, make the most profit. It's because the type of monopoly that you get for a compound allows you to, make something at a very low price and have a very high margin on the sale of it, and in theory, make quite a lot of money. I mean, many pharmaceutical drugs are blockbuster drugs that are making billions of dollars a year, and so that's, I think, conceived of as a possibility for some things. Although, of course, these aren't just drugs that people will, go to their pharmacy and pick up and then take it home. They have, this whole, clinical infrastructure that needs to be built around it so people can take these as part of psychedelic assisted therapy. So that's certainly going to play a big role in determining like how much companies are making off this, but also just kind of what the business model is. But certainly, if a company is just considering starting like just clinics without having, a protected drug compound, that, I think that makes them potentially, like, I guess, less interesting as an investment target, because clinics are probably not seen as being as profitable as a drug compound. But yeah, I mean, there certainly are a variety of different ways you can beyond those, but those would be important ones to think about.
Right. And so I think a lot of people, when they hear about psychedelics, as we've said, these compounds have been around for a very long time. When people hear about them being put into the pharmaceutical industry model, it seems kind of jarring, because you're like, well, you've not discovered this. If you're trying to patent psilocybin, like, this isn't an invention. So is it possible to kind of patent naturally occurring substances? You mentioned an ayahuasca patent around in the 80s earlier.
Yeah, and that's a very unique situation. I mean, I think it was definitely a sort of cultural and like a shock for sort of policy reasons for many ways, and obviously that was something that was considered pretty despicable by a lot of people, that somebody would try to have a patent on ayahuasca. But the actual grant of that patent was very narrow, so it wasn't something that covered like ayahuasca in general. It really just covered a specific plant and the specific genetics of that plant and that plant's clones. So you can, I guess, dispute like how kind of relevant that would be to the practice of just taking ayahuasca generally. I mean, and so I think for that, I guess I would sort of separate the kind of patent policy issues from the kind of broader cultural issues around that. But for natural compounds generally, I mean, so the basics that I think you alluded to for getting a patent are, it has to be novel, but it also has to be non-obvious. But the first requirement, which is really the core requirement of any patent, is that it has to be something that's new. It has to be novel. And any naturally occurring compound is not going to meet that requirement, because, of course, it's already existing in the world. So anything that's ever been disclosed or anything that already exists, a patent can't be granted on it. But of course, there are ways to get patent protection that cover a natural compound if it's part of something else, or if it's something that's inventive has been sort of applied to it. So Compass's patents, of course, are probably the best example of that, where they're not getting a patent on psilocybin, the compound or the chemical, but they're getting a patent on a particular sort of form of that psilocybin that isn't naturally occurring.
Right. So you have, like, with the ayahuasca situation, it's interesting distinction you made. So is it a bit like how people with like genetically modified crops or just with different species of apples. Say, a company can have a patent on, you can't grow a golden delicious apple without paying this company, for example. But that's while that might have been the case with this one ayahuasca plant, it's not. Those aren't the kind of patents we're concerned with here, right? We're concerned with unless, I mean, there ends up being, magic mushroom farms or something. That's probably when
yeah, I mean,
that,
that's
that would
possible.
be irrelevant.
Yeah, and there actually was, I think, also in the 80s, a plant patent filed on a type of psilocybin mushroom truffle. But there haven't been any since then. I mean, it's something that's in theory possible, and certainly there could be other, I suppose, ayahuasca plant patents filed. Although, I mean, hopefully people have learned their lesson that that's something that's going to be reputationally difficult to pursue. But yeah, I mean, I think this is different. The examples you use are good ones because actually Apple plant patents are probably considered the most valuable because that's something where people really do create a brand around a different type of apple. And apples, the way they're grown, they can be, easily sort of cloned, and they are all genetic copies. But there are also like Monsanto's patents that cover genetically modified crops. Like those are utility patents, not plant patents, because they cover any plant, and whether or not it's a genetic clone of a particular original one that has the genetic modification, for instance, that makes them, withstand the Roundup pesticide or whatever we call it, biocide.